science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are yet once again listening to Architecture Talk, where we try and advance the frontier of architectural thinking in a cross-disciplinary and a transdisciplinary way by interrogating what architecture is and isn't, both from a professional, academic, and from a transdisciplinary perspective. Today, I am taking on not just transdisciplinarity, but also cross-culturality, and talking to Arshia Sattar, who is a scholar of Sanskrit, a translator, who translated famously the Ramayana, the epic Indian text, which is foundational and central to Hindu society, and which has been controversially appropriated, reinscribed in many ways in the country, particularly recently, but is in other ways the armature of South Asian Hindu morality. She gave a presentation at the Poche Studios, which were held online this past summer, and she presented a narrative of the three cities of the Ramayana. Ayodhya, which is the ideal city, Lanka, which is the city of luxury and excess, and then the third city of the monkeys, which is Kishkinda. Based on all these, I thought we had to have a conversation, and what a conversation it was. I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Arshia, thank you so much for doing this with me, and welcome to Architecture Talk. It was such a pleasure to hear your talk that was presented as part of this amazing studio that was put together thanks to COVID. This is one of the great advantages of COVID. No? Sort of new innovations happen.
Yeah.
Fantastic studio put together by Riaz and Sudipto and Neelkant Chaya and all these other fabulous people, with not only 80-90 students, but with correspondents and lecturers from around the world. And in the course of being one of the respondents on that studio, one of my great pleasures was that I was introduced to a series of thinkers whom I frankly did not know much about before, including yourself. And,
no, it was a great lineup. I mean, I have to say I was a little bit overwhelmed when I saw like who my colleagues were in that sense, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh and people that I've admired for a very, very long time, but also people I think who have contributed to the intellectual landscape that we inherited,
Yes.
They're just that much older than me, and I'm sure that much older than you as well.
Yeah.
The liberal landscape that we took so much for granted. I mean, most of the people speaking at the studio were makers of that landscape, really.
Absolutely. And isn't it true that we are sort of witnessing the erosion and destruction of that landscape, both politically, intellectually, and in the sort of death of well-established institutions in India? Is it not?
Absolutely. It's a very terrifying time because, on the one hand, we're talking about the death of ideas, we're talking about the death of dissent, and the murder of institutions. But there are also so many people who are in personal physical danger.
Right.
And that is something that we must not forget. This kind of bullying. I mean, we're all feeling stifled. Yes, of course. But some people are in greater danger than some other people.
No questions about it. I mean, there's a sort of a global rise of fascism. I mean, think of what's happening here in the United States.
I know, my goodness.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, Kalyug hai. Kya kare
hai to. They told us it was going to happen. We didn't believe that. We thought, it'll come after us. The last day.
No. Kalyug is here.
It is. Mahabharata told us that.
Global warming is here. Nazi
Bilkul.
racism, fascism is on the rise.
Absolutely.
Institutions are being appropriated by agencies of power, and the rich people are
Yes.
buying the universities.
Yep. 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 Yep.
So this is why I'm envious of you as an independent scholar doing your own thing.
Well, it has its price, quite literally, because it means you earn very differently.
Of course, yes, yes.
I.e., not a lot. It's either feast or famine. Either you're earning really well, and then there's like months with nothing, um, and it also it's very glamorous from the outside to be an independent scholar, but in so many ways it gives you very little traction, because you are fundamentally unlocated. You're not dislocated because, you never belonged anywhere, but you are unlocated. And just even as a physical metaphor, you can see how your feet are not on any piece of ground. And so in a weird way, when you need something to stand up for you or something to support you, there really isn't anything there. Which of course didn't matter until like a year ago, or 2 years ago.
What do you mean? What happened 2 years ago that impacted you
Well, I
directly?
mean, just that our dispensation or our current government in India, let alone the world, has just become more and more aggressive towards people who think differently, people who argue for pluralism. Forget diversity. Diversity is a very big word. Multiple perspectives on anything. Forget even political dissent. Political dissent is also something that people do very consciously. But in an old-fashioned feminist way, I will say the personal is the political. So when I do my work, whether it's about Ramayana or anything else, if it's about reading theater or putting theater on stage, there is a politics in that, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So
and certainly in what you do, I mean, you are translating the Kathasarit Sagar, and you are translating Valmiki's Ramayana. I mean, talk about personal being political. You are cutting to the heart and soul of at least a normative reading of Hindu India.
Honestly, Vikram, I didn't realize any of that when I was doing it. I mean, I was 36. I translated Ramayana between the ages of 34 and 36. It took me 2 years. And I just come back from graduate school. I came back to India when I was 30 years old. I came back to a place that I believed was free, having lived through the dark ages in America with Reagan and Bush. I mean, I thought the world was ending then. Little did I know that it could get worse, but it has. Whatever we say about Reagan and Bush and the world ending and all of that, I don't remember there being this kind of sustained political persecution.
Oh, no, nothing. Now you look back, Reagan looks like a statesman. At that time, we thought he was the devil.
God. Oh, really? Honestly, he does.
You studied with Wendy Doniger and A.K. Ramanujan at the University of Chicago. Fantastic institutions, amazing scholars. And you come back to India at the dawn of neoliberalism. Yes?
Absolutely.
I mean, so what happened then?
So, well, I had grown up like yourself, I imagine, in socialist India, where there was no consumerism, there was nothing to buy, which was all fine. But what that socialist mahal, that milieu gave us was, even though, I mean, I'm born in 1960, right? So that's 20 some years after independence, 13 years after independence. But we still were somehow in the project of nation building, right?
Yeah, and the Nehruvian project was still an ideal, yeah.
And we believed that it was our obligation to share wealth rather than accumulate it, right? Despite the heaviness, the heavy boot of socialism that was sitting on our heads, this was something we believed in entirely. But nonetheless, when we came back in 1990, and also the thing, everybody in America was like, hey, you're going back to India, Arey, where is your green card? Where is your American job?
Oh.
But, America seemed like hell in the 80s, right? And India seemed like, oh my God, there's Rajiv Gandhi. Something has opened up, right? Something felt free in India. And we came back, and it was like the Wild West. I mean, it was incredible, and there was a lot of energy. And my generation, we were 30 years old in the 90s, and you know what it's like to be in your 30s, man.
Yeah, I'm born 1963, so I'm more or less
exactly, we're like contemporaries in every way, right? And that, I mean, in our 30s we are truly invulnerable, right? Because we think, oh, I learned so much in my 20s, right? Now I'm smart. In my 20s, I was like, oh, I was learning. Now I know everything, right? And so we came back to that kind of an India, but the shadow was already there, because people were talking about Muslims in very, very different ways.
Well, Babri Masjid had happened.
In 92 was Babri Masjid. Advani had his Rath Yatra. And I remember this. I was so shocked. People that I'd grown up with, college friends of mine, and I would say something, in a discussion, in a living room, they'd say, Acha, you're speaking as a Muslim. And I was like, no, I'm speaking as a woman, or I'm speaking as a human being, or I'm speaking as an Indian. But suddenly everything that came out of my mouth was coming out of the mouth of a Muslim. And for the first time in my own country, I had this identity thrust upon me, right? And I resisted it. And I just thought, oh, these people are very stupid, And if I had thought all of this through, or if I had had a less secular upbringing, if I had had a greater sense of myself as a Muslim, I would never have translated Ramayana,
Really?
I just did.
I thought that's why you translated the Ramayana.
Well, other people thought that was the reason why I did it. My publisher, who was Penguin at the time, David Devidar, he was extremely clear. He said, no Muslim woman has ever translated Valmiki. No woman has ever translated Valmiki. You should do it. And I was like, oh yeah, of course, I'll do it. But interestingly enough, the book came out at the end of 96, and we had the first BJP coalition in power at the time. And Penguin just dropped the book. All this business.
They did?
Yeah. The book, I mean, no, they didn't drop it. It was published, but they didn't do anything with it. And I thought for the longest time, like for 5 years, I thought I'd written a really, really bad book. And I never talked about it. That was the time that I was teaching in this residential school, in the Western Ghats. We were really outside society. So it was very easy to forget that I'd written this book. And then people started saying, I read your Ramayana, it's fantastic. Oh, I really enjoyed it. Oh, I didn't know that. So when we left the school in 2002 and came back into society, as it were, I suddenly realized that people had actually been reading this book. I honestly, I didn't read the book for 7 years. It came, I put it on my bookshelf. I was so, in a sense, embarrassed about it, because nobody had said anything nice. Nobody had said anything. And then one day I read it and I was like, all right, you know what? This is really all right. This is not something I have to be embarrassed about. And then I started teaching from the book. And that really became my second acquaintance with Ramayana. And that's when the second lot of books has come out from that. Lost Loves, Uttarakanda. Now my new book is out next week. It's called Maryada, which is about Dharma. So I've had 2 Ramayana phases in my life. But I also want to say that, people say, oh, you translate Sanskrit. I don't translate Sanskrit. I only know how to translate Ramayana. And in Sanskrit, that is possible because, it is such a rich and complex language, but it's also a language that is obsessed with taxonomies. So every genre that Sanskrit speaks in, it speaks differently.
Oh, so I didn't know that.
I know how to translate epic, but I look at, Kalidasa or Bhavbhuti or, Bharvi, Kirata, Arjuna. And I'm just like, what is this, man? I don't even know where the word ends,
Interesting, very interesting. That's right.
So I'm more and more, I need to persuade people that I'm not a Sanskritist, I'm a Ramayanist.
So tell me this. So does the idea of rasa exist in the Ramayana's writing? Is it present in the language? I mean, it must, right? I mean,
well, yes and no.
Yeah.
Rasa is sort of retrospectively used to understand Ramayana, right? And to color it. It's also true that Ramayana, of course, was not composed in a single instant by a single person. It was composed over centuries. What we call Valmiki Ramayana was probably put together over about 300 or 400 years. Now, simultaneously with the later parts of the Ramayana, we have rasa theory developing. Right? That's when it becomes Adikavya. That's when we attribute certain qualities and certain kinds of literary constructs to what was, I think, in its very, very basic form, a bardic poem. What would you guess is the official rasa of Ramayana?
I don't know.
I mean, we'd say heroism, right?
Yes.
Or we say Shringara or love. It's not. It's Karuna. Compassion.
Karuna, compassion.
Yeah. So, and that has a really, I mean, Ramanujan pointed this out. But, many people have taken his ideas a little bit further. And the Ramayana opens in its third chapter of the Balakanda, which of course is written later, right? So the third chapter of the Balakanda, which sets up the way we are supposed to receive the text, that is that incredible moment where Valmiki sees a hunter killing one of a pair of mating birds. And he says, you will suffer for all eternity because, I know he's very moved by the surviving bird cries out. So it is Valmiki's karuna, his compassion for the bird, that sets the flavor for the Ramayana. And what Ramanujan, he's not so interested in the karuna part of it, but what he says is two things. He says, the book opens with two creatures, the croucher birds, who love each other desperately and are separated. And he said, that is what the Ramayana is about. The Ramayana is about being separated from those that you love. Whether it's Dasharatha and Rama, or Rama and Sita, or Lakshmana and, whoever it is. So, I find that, only Ramanujan could come up with something like this, his
So that's his reading of Karuna. Karuna comes from separation?
Well, one feels sympathy for the person who is no longer with the person that they love best, whether it's their son or their mother or their wife or their, Sita is separated from her sons at the end, But all of this, we must keep in mind, is the Balakanda and the Uttarakanda came much, much, much after the central books of the text. But now we take it as an integrated text. So we can read Karuna as the primary rasa of the text. I mean, I still have trouble with that. I would argue that the primary rasa of Ramayana, as Ramanujan argues, is viraha, love in separation. Not Shringara, which is love in union, but love in separation. Not simply romantic love, but love of all kinds. But officially, if you look at all the Shastris and all of that, the rasa is Karuna. Yeah. What is the rasa of the Mahabharata? Even more surprising, Shanti.
Really?
Yeah.
Shanti as in peace.
But in a way, when you say that the rasa of the Mahabharata is Shanti, it prompts you to think about the book as being fundamentally against war. That, and that also gives us a very important not important, but it gives us a very simple way to integrate the Gita into the Mahabharata. It is the warrior who says, I do not want to fight.
Yes.
So if we think that the impulse of the Mahabharata really is towards peace, then we can read it like we read the Iliad now. It's profoundly anti-war, right? But if we say that the Ratha of the Mahabharata is virya, is heroism, then we are like, we're glorifying the warrior, which the Mahabharata does. But it becomes a very, very different story.
In your presentation that you gave at the Poche studio, you pointed out that in Valmiki's Ramayana, where Sita tells Ram and Lakshman once they reach Dandaka forests, that now they must observe the laws of the forest, the dharma of the forest.
Yes.
And they must not use their weapons to kill and so on. But of course, that is not what they do, and that is not what happens.
By that very argument, Sita is right. They act inappropriately in the forest. They use violence in a place where violence is uncalled for. Dharma is so, as we say in theater or art, site-specific. The Dharma of Ayodhya makes it possible for us to behave in ways like this. It also makes it necessary for us to behave in ways like this.
Kshetra karma vidhiyate, no?
Exactly. And then when we step outside Ayodhya, then some other, of course, physical space, but some other moral space is also implied, and it is up to us to have that sensitivity, which Sita has. She says to him, you can go back to being a Kshatriya when you return to Ayodhya, but right now, don't do this. And of course, immediately, after that conversation or that caution that she offers Rama, there's that ghastly incident with Shurpanakha, which is, in every way disturbing. And then, having done that to Shurpanakha, the next horrible thing that Rama and Lakshmana, Rama, in fact, perpetrate is the killing of Vali.
Yes.
He's fighting somebody else. Rama's in hiding. He shoots him in the back.
Shoots him from behind.
So the transgressions are getting more and more egregious.
But
and then
one of the things that's interesting in your presentation is, as you just said, that in the Ramayana, there is almost a co-identity between place and morality. Between city and ethics, between forest and dharma. It is as if they both produce each other. I mean,
absolutely.
How do you see that? Is there sort of like a causality between the two, or what is the structure here?
God, Vikram, I've thought about that for so many years. Whether we can ascribe a causality, a cause and effect, a sort of chronology to chicken and egg, which came first, that kind of conundrum to it. I think this is true of both the epics, actually. I don't think it's only true of Ramayana. In Ramayana, I think it's more noticeable because the war is so small. In Mahabharata, it's dominated by the war, the preparation, the war itself, the aftermath, and all, that we tend not to notice these other ways in which it resembles Ramayana. So I think one of the things that is going on in this period is, so the earliest layers, the earliest articulations of the Ramayana story and the Mahabharata story are coeval with the middle Upanishads. Right? So now in the Upanishads, we have a quietist impulse, right? Kings, Kshatriyas have wisdom. It's not only the Brahmins, right? Because Upanishads are reacting to what the Vedas had become. But the other thing that is also very, very important, that Upanishads and early epics and all, they're written within a century of the life of the historical Buddha, and the life of the historical Mahavira, right? So we have the idea of renunciation. We have the idea of Kshatriya princes saying, no, I don't want this, man. You know, I don't believe in this. Rama says that. Yudhishthira says that, right? So there is an emotional and existential space where this so-called dissent or this self-doubt can occur. You're not a freak for thinking this, you know. It's a shifting period in terms of, are we nomadic? Are we agricultural? Are we oligarchic? Are we monarchic? Are we republican? What is going on? Yeah, we haven't even reached the first empire yet. Yeah, I mean, arguably the Mauryas are the first empire, but the epics continue to be composed, you know, while the idea of empire, the idea of imperium is settling, you know, in the Indo-Gangetic plain, right? We haven't even encountered bhakti yet, right? Bhakti is coming. Bhakti gets written backwards into the Ramayana. How does this guy become Vishnu? I think the epics really are about the tension between the priestly class and the warrior class, right? And if we don't want to talk about class and caste, we can say about like priestly power and temporal power. Who is the boss? The guy who has access to the God, or the guy who looks after your cows? Right? The guy, So that is the fundamental tension of the epics, right? And I think the way it's articulated in the epics is the tension around violence and non-violence. Right? Because when Rama goes to the forest, when Yudhishthira goes to the forest, these periods of exile, which of course is an epic trope, no? I mean, Odysseus goes into exile, Gilgamesh goes into the forest. Sabko karna, you have to do this, right? To become a king, you need to go sit in the forest and think.
And you have to did exile in Chicago.
Big, I did. I did. Yeah. So contrast, as you said, the between the city and the not city, which is typically the forest, is built into the structure of these stories.
But you describe in your paper, you know, in Ayodhya, and then you describe Kishkinda, and then of course you describe Lanka, and then there is the forest. There are sort of 4 sites you are describing. And they're some just lovely descriptions. I mean, Ayodhya is by far the most boring description because
ain't it though? Yeah.
Nothing much happens over there. But Kishkindha and of course Lanka are luscious descriptions. And you know, I'm struck by the description of Lanka in particular, that you know, Hanumanji goes to Lanka and he's just dazzled by the city. I mean, he sees the city and it is described, Hanuman gazed in wonder at the city of Lanka with its beautiful gateways and ramparts, climbing vines, and he saw the city spread before him like a woman.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
The walls and ramparts her body, the walls and ramparts her body, the vast ocean her clothes, the fortifications her hair, and the upper stories of the mansions her earrings.
Yeah.
Lanka was fine and lofty as the peaks of Kailash, and her tall buildings sounds like Manhattan, seemed poised to take off into the air. So this is such an amazing description, and then, you know, and he goes on and on and on, and then suddenly he remembers, oh, no, this is not a good place. And but he's totally
seduced. But here's the thing, no, Vikram, that this guy is supposed to be a brahmachari. What is he seeing? The city as a woman? How do you know? Right? What do you know of women? And then, of course, he goes into the harem, and he's just astounded. He's never seen this kind of beauty. And as you said, he shakes himself and says, hey, you know, I've come here for a job. I'm not coming to, I'm not a tourist, you know. I think it's very...
Talk to me a little bit about your thinking, your feelings about describing a city as a woman.
This is one of the things about being a translator, I think, that I learned with Ramayana is the hardest translation to make is not of language, but of politics. You know, when you are translating a text that says the opposite of everything that you believe in, you have to learn to shut your mouth and to shut your mind, because if you want to do a commentary, you're free to do that, which I have done in several books. But in the moment of the translation, this is what you do. I will say also, I was fascinated by the fact that, you know, in a Hindu universe, in a Hindu sacred universe, in a religion which, like every other religion, is fundamentally patriarchal and anthropocentric not as human but as man, right?
Phallogorocentric rather more.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. Yeah. You know, we're told to think of the temple as the microcosm of the human body, you know, and here's the cosmos. We think of Purusha Sukta in Veda, all like that. And I was like, wow, man, it's Lanka that is described as a woman. When have we ever thought to create a city for women? You know, we talked about this in the Poche Studios, you know, when we were talking about Central Vista and all like that. And, you know, how more and more I see now, cities are not made for women, right? That they are fundamentally masculinist enterprises. But if we imagine a city as a woman, how differently will we build it, right? Now, of course, I didn't think all of this, you know, in 1996 when I was translating Ramayana. This is what I'm thinking now.
No, I'm talking to you now.
Yeah. If we are to think of a city as a woman, how differently would we lay it out? I mean, what would be more and what would be less? Would there be more public spaces? I don't know if those more public spaces are still going to be inhabited by, you know, misogynists. No, we don't want more public spaces. No, I mean, it's a real mental and emotional flip.
I think of, you know, the modern Western Enlightenment-based discourse on the relationship between city and morality, you know, is quite stuck in the sense that on the one hand, you have somebody like Hannah Arendt who's trying to articulate what a democratic public space is. And she says, bhai, public square hona chahiye. But then she says, well, actually, all you need is a table. And then she says, you don't even really need a table. We can all just sit, as long as there is open and free conversation, you don't really need a table. So architecture in the city in that sense is a scaffold she sets up and then gets rid of. Yes. But then you read people like Lefebvre and, you know, later on more 60s, etc. And they're trying to articulate the city as such, as a place of multiplicity and plurality and democracy, and where anybody can be whoever they want to be, building on 19th century notions of the flaneur and, you know, those kind of things.
Yes.
But where I'm taking this is there seems to be a tortured, you know, making the city fit, because the city in Western civilization is a den of evil, you know, it always is, unlike the Greek sort of notion. But in the Ramayana, as you are describing, it seems to me that there is a sort of a simple, not simple, but sort of transparent, obvious interrelationship between ethics, morality, sensuality, and space, whether it's the city or whether it's the forest or whether it's the semi-city.
Yeah, I think, okay, so earlier I said that both the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, really enjoy the tension between the city and the not city, right? The forest or whatever it is. Having said that, like so many other things in the Ramayana is somehow seeking ideals, idealisms, archetypes almost, right? That this is the perfect man, this is the perfect woman, this is the perfect bad guy, this is the perfect monkey, this is the perfect bhakta, this is the perfect brother. You know, there's a series of idealizations that are set up. And I think in order to reinforce the paradigmatic quality of its characters. Its spaces must not be in conflict with the nature of its characters, right? Though it is possible to be good in Ayodhya because Ayodhya itself is good, right? If you live in Lanka, you are going to be a, gambling, whoring, whatever.
That's not what I read in the description. There was no gambling and whoring. Why don't you read to us this paragraph which you have written?
So, the opulence and excess of Lanka are mentioned over and over again, each image of sensuality and decadence outdoing the one before. And once again, as with Kishkinda, the essence of the city is located in the descriptions of its women. Hanuman saw exquisite women who appeared to be high-minded, virtuous, and pure. They shone like stars, absorbed in their lovers and their drinking. He saw other women who were illuminated by their own beauty. They were shy and hid in their lovers' arms like birds clinging to their mates, enjoying a night of bliss. He saw women with smooth complexions, bare-breasted, with skin the color of molten gold, others with skin like moonlight. Everywhere he looked, Hanuman saw rows upon rows of moon-bright faces, eyes with long curling lashes, and ornaments that glittered like lightning.
Yeah, I'm happy ready to move.
Yeah, who doesn't want to go there? I have to say, I think in the whole Ramayana, one of my most beloved phrases is with skin the color of molten gold, others with skin like moonlight. But here's the thing, Vikram, I think that Ravana has to be so completely the opposite of Rama. Rama is a person of restraint. Ravana is the person who is appetitive. Whatever he wants, he takes. So I don't like the word lustful, particularly. He wants everything. He wants money. He wants power. He wants wealth. He wants women. He wants to fly in the skies. He wants to have the biggest Pushpaka Vimana, So he's about excess. So in order for us to understand just how different Ravana is to Rama, and why they are naturally antagonistic, we have to understand also that his city is like that. In a sense, because the characters are, as I was saying, archetypal in a way. Everything has to boost their fundamental characteristic, right? Ayash hai wo. How can I show him as, decadent? Without showing that his city is lush, and lush is the word that comes to me constantly when I think about Lanka.
So if we take these, there's the city of austerity, which is Ayodhya, and then the city of consumption, if you like, and excess or appropriation, and that's Lanka. But then we have Kishkinda.
Even from the last time we were together virtually, I was fascinated that you were fascinated by Kishkinda. What is this? I thought you would go for Lanka or something. But tell me about Kishkinda.
Kishkinda is it, as far as I'm concerned. The other two cities are recognizable, right, in the sense of they're sort of it's a frame, it's a setup, it's a frame job, right?
Yes, it is.
But then there is the possibility of this third site, which is a double site in the sense that there is both the forest and then there is the city, and sort of there is a microcosm of the reading of the entire epic, in the sense that Sugriva is exiled and has to come back and has to fight Bali, and this whole thing goes on. And then there is Swarupnakha, who is a Rakshasi in the forest, but she has these immense powers. But then there are these monkeys who have morality and ethics, but they are still monkeys, and it's very confusing in one sense, right? But it's also the place of possibility, right? I mean, and that's where the action starts. It's the site of exile.
I came to Ramayana, I was led to Ramayana by Hanuman. I did my first academic work on Hanuman, and my dissertation is about Hanuman and Valmiki. And so really he was my guide into.
Hanuman is the guide in most of India.
Yeah, rightly so. I mean, who doesn't like this guy?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how can you dislike him? He's
Hanuman and Ganesh are the rulers.
Bilkul. Yeah. And of course, as in Ramayana, Vaishnava theology as it develops, you cannot reach Rama until you've been to Hanuman. He's the Dwarapala. He's always outside the temple. He is your intercessor. Ramaduta, you know, he is the messenger of Rama. But not only, he's not simply the messenger of Rama to Ravana, but he is your entry point. He is the portal. And I think that...
why was he important for you personally? Did you have a relationship with Hanuman before you studied it?
Yeah, my mother says it's because I was bitten by a monkey when I was 3. She said, Hanuman took you. Yeah, when I was little, we lived in Madras and we'd gone to Guindy Park and there was a cage full of monkeys and this baby monkey somehow got out and bit me. So my mom said, you know, years later in my 20s, when I'm writing about Hanuman, she said, this is why it is.
This is it.
And I've had a couple of pretty bizarre monkey encounters in my life. But I think also what happens as Ramayana moves from Valmiki's story to Tulsidasa's story, which is 1500 years. 1500 years, yeah? So actually the story, when Tulsi tells the story, it's a different world, literally, metaphorically, literature-wise, you know, everything. But in that period, what has happened is that as ideas of bhakti develop, you know, it's an amazing story. What are you going to do with a monkey that flies and speaks Sanskrit? What are you going to do with this guy? You have to figure him out somehow. So that's when we get this very solid commentatorial tradition and theological tradition where the monkey is the middle creature between the perfection of Ayodhya and the licentiousness of Lanka. So again, Kishkinda...
That is why he stands for us, because we are trapped in the middle, right?
Exactly. And that's why Kishkinda appeals to you, for example.
Yes.
As you said, this is possible.
Yeah, Kishkinda is the city I can build, you know. Lanka is too hopeful for me. Ayodhya to chodo, wo to is well beyond.
Bahut boring. Yeah. It's really interesting to me that in Kishkinda, the women have freedom. You know, they can have many lovers. They can, you can, the monkey society is not as censorious towards women as Ayodhya is. And yet, there is some kind of, not that women are controlled in Kishkinda, but because they have freedom, they exercise it as women should, rather than as men tell them to, you know? Kishkinda, the monkeys are actually, many people will say the monkeys are the heart of the Ramayana. Tulsi himself, Hanuman Bhakta before he loved Rama, and Hanuman was the one who told him, you should do this and you should do that, and you know, the anthropomorphic resemblance between monkeys and humans, and it has led to all kinds of pretty ugly racialist theories, you know, by upper caste men, readers of the Ramayana, these are tribals, you know, they used to have a tail, they are uncivilized, you know, we have to teach them all this, look at what Rama did, he made Hanuman into... It's slippery ground to walk on.
Well, I'm sure, I mean, these are the tribal, I mean, the forest dwellers were, you know, we still have them in India, around the world. And of course, they were big in that time and they had to be coded in some form. And so we can see Kishkinda and that entire civilization is a kind of coding of that culture.
Absolutely. And in that same narrative, in that same kind of coding, then we see as, you know, Periyar and, you know, lots of Dravidian thinkers, they see the Ramayana as Aryan expansion into the peninsula, into the into the Deccan. And I'm a little leery of that. I mean, for me, as I think, as I was saying the last time we spoke, that for me, the magic of the Ramayana is not that it reflects a historical moment. It's the fact that it doesn't. It reflects a moment of the imagination. Yeah, it's an archetype of the imagination. I mean, Hanuman is... I get sort of speechless when I think about him.
Yeah, he's a fascinating figure. I mean, totally. A couple of things that stand out for me is that these cities seem to have wide thoroughfares.
Yeah, I know.
And they all have white walls or white towers.
Yeah,
wide thoroughfares and white walls and white towers.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know. Yeah, in Ayodhya, the white walls obviously stand for its sattvic nature. It's, it's so moral, it's so restrained. Lanka does not have white tower. Well, actually,
it does. It does. Yeah,
it looks like Kailasha. And so does Kishkinda. Kishkinda also looks like...
They both have white walls. Ayodhya city, dazzling white buildings that look like they're hanging in the air.
Yeah.
And Kishkinda, we have, King's Palace rivals Indra's.
Yeah.
Surrounded by sparkling white walls that were hard to breach.
I wonder, Vikram, if it's like this. It's one thing we didn't have. And so when we had to imagine a city, that's what we attributed to it. We've never had a white thoroughfare. We've never had a white mansion. Let's say that if I had an ideal city, I would, like we imagined our ideal cities in 2020 in India, we want public spaces, right? We want green. We want places that are safe for women. It's because we don't have them, not because we do, but because we don't.
Okay. No, that's simply an inversion, and which therefore is in a sense, a reflected mirror of reality.
Yeah.
I mean, in modernism, whiteness comes from hygiene, cleanliness, and of course, Eurocentrism. We associate whiteness to 19th century Eurocentrism and conceptions of hygiene and cleanliness. But of course, whiteness as a cultural value clearly is inscribed into, Arya world here in the 3rd century BC. And so I'm going to tell all my modernist colleagues that white walls were invented in the Ramayana.
Yeah, we did it first. Narendra Modi ji would be very pleased with you. Humne pehle sab kuch humne pehle kiya. No, it is. I mean, I also really, really wonder about where does this picture of the city come from? In Mahabharata, the city is not described, the palace is described, right? And if we think about where people were actually
None of the cities are described? Kurukshetra?
Not really. Palaces, yeah, of course, the palace which was made as to disappear and burn. Exactly. Probably the very, very early composers of the Ramayana were pastoralists. They were more likely to be living in smaller pastoral settlements than in these cities with, shining towers and wide thoroughfares and, I'd never thought about this before. Thank you for pushing me on it. Like, as we say, what are they smoking? Where's this?
Well, they were definitely smoking stuff. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. I mean, one of the whole Vedas is devoted to things you can...
Absolutely.
Soma was everywhere. Yeah. Without Soma, there is no writing.
No, there isn't the vision of universe and oneness and all that. But if you were going to make a Kishkinda, what would you do first? I'm a literalist. I'm going to take Alexander McQueen fashion female figures and start to transform them into an urbanism and read through that. So Lucy Irigary's book, The Sex Which Is Not One, it is, which is a play on one. She's talking about it is not a sex in the sense of phallogocentrism, but it's a sex which is double or triple. So I'm my idea is to try and hybridize these two texts
and therefore try and produce an image of a city, because a city and architecture is generally used to create singularity. Here is place. You produce identity and you fix it via space, whereas identity cannot be fixed, and identity is double and triple. So, and the best cities, have the possibility of multiplicity written in them always. So rather than, I want to create the possibility of a city which is not one, is my lexicon, and but in something that is, so I'm not sure. It's a unclear project to me, but I want to explore it.
One of the things I talked about in my dissertation, or rather it was sort of the main thing. So at the time, I was convinced that how do we know when we encounter a being like Hanuman that how immediately we suspend our disbelief, right? Nobody says that somehow he comes to us like Swayambhu. It's fine. Whatever he does, right? So how is it that as a reader or as somebody who encounters myth or epic or Hanuman in particular, what is the sign? So I was arguing that the sign is that they're Kama Rupa. They can take whatever shape they want.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And I was arguing that a truly mythological being will always be Kama Rupa. That is the semiotic that we understand as a reader. Right. This guy's changing shape. He's a mythological being. Why is he able to change shape? Because he's a product of miscegenation. His parents do not belong to the same category of being. Right? His father is a god. His mother is an apsara. She's cursed to be a monkey. So he takes a monkey form, right? So, I mean, those days, my vocabulary was miscegenation and, all of that. But now the trendy word is hybridity.
It's this trans-rupism, which is...
Kama Rupa is such a beautiful
word.
Word.
Let's introduce Kam Rup as a theoretical term into discourse today.
Absolutely.
It's not the same as hybridity and miscegenation.
No, it's not. It's not hybridity at all. It is choice. Because Hanuman can change his shape. He can change his size. He can be a monkey. He can be a brahmachari. He can be... That is possibility. And that's what a city should afford all its citizens.
And that's what a city should be. Kamarupa city. I mean, it's things that a city that can change form, like a beautiful woman. Yeah, I mean, it's like be somebody else. So it's theater in the sense. The city is theater.
No, and it's again, when we now the new words that we use in the 21st century, fluidity. Identities are fluid, but Kama Rupa is an act of will. Right? I want to change my shape. So I don't, lots of people say, oh, you should write about all these the Indian mythological characters, the shapeshifters. Kids love shapeshifters. I said, this is not a shapeshifter, man. This is not a shapeshifter. Right? And don't tell me like metamorphosis, like, Kafka and all this rubbish. Like, I mean, Gregor is a nightmare. Yeah. I mean, we cannot diminish Kafka by saying, oh, it's a transmorphism. No. This is like existential terror, right? So, but Kama Rupa is a word that opens up a lot of possibilities, and I do believe, even now, it's 30 years since I wrote my dissertation, but I believe that you have the capacity to change shape. Because you are not this and not that. You are neither a completely divine being like Vayu, nor a semi-divine being like Anjana, your mother, nor are you actually a monkey at all. Your monkey shape and form is given to you so that your mother is not embarrassed, and she produces a child that looks like her. So, and Shurpanakha has the same thing, right? And her Shurpanakha, Ravana's parents, the mother is the mother is a Rakshasi, but his father is a Brahmin, right? Pulastya's son, Vishrava's.
Okay.
Right? So and it is Rama who doesn't have the capacity to change his shape. And now we can think of that as a metaphor for the rigidity of his dharma. If you can change shape physically, that means you have the capacity to see that, okay, here I should look like this, here I should look like that. But if you can't change shape, like we cannot change shape, we also, it becomes a quality of your mind. Because your body cannot respond. Your mind just says, okay, well, what's to think about?
Well, the whole transgender discussion in one sense is moving.
Absolutely.
In that, possibility of changing shape, which is partially my interest in fashion, because fashion is the ability to change shape.
But also, I mean, transgender conversations now are foregrounded because we have the capacity to fulfill transgender wishes and imaginations, with medicine and technology. And mainly, we have the capacity to confront prejudice now, so it's possible for a transgender imagination to live fully rather than in hiding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's like that. If you're, it's now this is a chicken and an egg. Does the mind lead it or does the body lead it?
Well, of course, we have post-humanism in which the distinction between mind and body is no longer tenable either. The mind is the body, and the body is the mind. There is no distinction really.
That's an excellent, thank you for reminding me of that. A little bit Cartesian.
It's a bit too Cartesian to have, and sort of, and again, it's that, the possibility, if you see the Lanka as the city of the body and Ayodhya as the city of the mind, Kishkinda, defies all those things.
Absolutely.
And offers a different way to sort of
and in that. You can be who you want to be in Kishkinda. It's a city that allows possibility, and therefore it is inhabited, as Valmiki tells us, that the citizens of Gandharva of Kishkinda were all children of the Gandharvas, right? And that's why they were so beautiful. They didn't look like how we think monkeys look, though I think monkeys are beautiful. But again, it's because they are miscegenated beings.
Or transformed, whatever the word is. I mean, because architecture is either, asked to be the ideality. Your friend Peter Zumthor would like that kind of a city, or it is generally castigated as slut city. It caters to money. It caters to. It will go to whoever uses it. It has no morality, you say. It's just buildings, and buildings will take a sage or a thief, equally. So, so these are the two standard definitions of the city. But Kishkinda offers a different possibility.
Why should a city determine morality? Right? And I mean, of course, I think of women when this happens. Why are women not allowed to occupy public space? What is this? And we were talking about the difference between Bombay and Delhi. And I mean, myself having grown up in Bombay and felt very, very differently from my peers who grew up in Delhi. Who gave the city the right to police women's behavior? Right, which clearly Ayodhya does, not simply because it has, wide thoroughfares and wide towers, but because of the way sexuality is handled within Ayodhya. I mean, what does Kaikeyi do? She demands the best possible life for her son, but she uses her sexual wiles against her older husband, and we are persuaded that she is the villain of the whole story. No, she's not. She's doing her duty as a mother. When Rama and Sita come back to Ayodhya at the end of the story, it's the citizens of Ayodhya who criticize Sita, who are like, oh, what was she doing there? Who are you? I mean, what kind of city chooses to police its women and not its men? A very particular kind of city, no? And those are the cities that we have, certainly in this country, nurtured.
Anyway, it has been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Arshia. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.